Not every wound is a scream. Some are a vow made in silence to never be broken again. And if you see yourself in that quiet vow, what you're about to discover will change how you see your strength and your pain forever. We often mistake survival for living. We build fortresses around our hearts, convinced its strength. We become islands of self-sufficiency, believing its maturity. But what if these traits aren't signs of being whole, but rather maps to where we've been deeply hurt? Today, we're going to walk through 13 hidden signs that point to a history of unspoken pain, and more importantly, how to begin transforming that history into a future of conscious choice and profound healing. Stay with me, because this could fundamentally alter your relationship with yourself and those you love. Some scars aren't visible to the eye. They don't show on the skin. They reveal themselves in the hesitation before a smile, in the time it takes to lower a guard, in the sudden urge to be alone, even in a loving crowd. These are the imprints left on the soul. They don't announce their presence. They simply reshape a life from the inside out. They become a constant low hum of fatigue, a feeling that the world is just a little heavier for you than for others. Old sorrow doesn't always ask for attention. Sometimes it just settles in, becoming a part of your architecture. It turns into quiet where there was once conversation. It becomes a guarded posture where there was once open arms. Often, the person carrying it forgets the origin story. They just know they are perpetually tired, that simple things require Herculean effort. I've often described deep emotional hurt as a fracture in the spirit that, if left unattended, continues to ache. But I've also said, this fracture can become a sacred passage, not to erase the past, but to alchemize what still echoes like a danger. When pain is truly witnessed, it doesn't have to be a life sentence. It can become your most profound teacher. The tragedy is, our world rarely teaches us how to sit with discomfort. Society rewards output, not introspection. And so, those who have endured too much learn to adapt. They craft personas, develop emotional reflexes, and retreat. They move through life, often achieving great things, but a part of them remains on high alert, as if the slightest pressure could break what has only just begun to mend. You might see your own reflection in these patterns, or you might finally understand the behavior of someone you hold dear. This isn't about placing blame or pathologizing. It's about expanding your capacity for compassion for others, and critically for yourself, and releasing the shame. Because every single behavior has a root cause. Nothing emerges from a vacuum. So, if at any moment during our time together, you feel a tightening in your chest or the need to pause and breathe, don't be alarmed. That is simply your inner being, recognizing a truth it has always known. And that recognition, as simple as it seems, is the first and most courageous step toward healing. Some children learned far too young that reliance is risky, that expressing a need leads to rejection, that counting on someone ends in disappointment. And so, the psyche engineers a brilliant, painful solution. The individual becomes their own entire world, capable, decisive, a fortress. But inside, the spirit is weary. I've spoken of the adapted self as a structure the mind builds to ensure survival when authenticity feels too dangerous. It's a functional shell that protects but also profoundly isolates. The person grows accustomed to bearing every burden solo, and the outside world, seeing only the capable exterior, assumes they have no needs at all. But no human is built to carry the universe alone. That is why the first sign of those who have endured significant pain is the shield of extreme self-reliance. This isn't a badge of honor. It is the ghost of an old injury. It may look like power from a distance, but internally, its weight is immense. The individual declines to reveal struggle, but feels it intensely. They refuse to request support, but crave it. They've simply forgotten how, or they are too ashamed, or they can no longer recall the feeling of safety in vulnerability. This rigidity permeates everything: partnerships, friendships, career. Everything becomes a test of endurance. Everything is about maintaining control, but there is a toll. The shoulders are always tense. Affection feels like a threat, and rest feels like a failure. Even when surrounded by community, the person feels a profound, solitary loneliness, because hyperindependence isn't freedom. It is a cage where you hold the only key. Those living inside it aren't trying to be difficult. They are trying to ensure they will never be let down again. But in truth, it's just another way to remain secretly in pain. The second trait, commonly observed, is an overwhelming sense of empathy for others. On the surface, this looks like a beautiful gift, and in many ways, it is. But when empathy becomes a wired-in survival tactic, it ceases to be just a virtue and transforms into a coping mechanism. Some people, even in their earliest years, learn to read a room like it's a weather forecast for their own safety. They could sense a shift in the atmosphere before a storm arrived. They detected subtle changes in tone, a fleeting look, a telling silence. They honed such a sharp, intuitive sense that without realizing, they began to feel the emotions of others before they could even identify their own. This overdeveloped empathy does not spring from a place of peace. It is born from urgency, from the dread of becoming the focus of a parent's unpredictable anger, from the exhausting work of predicting the next emotional landslide from a caregiver, from the responsibility of maintaining domestic calm, even if that calm cost them their own sense of self. I've described projection as the unconscious act of seeing in others what we haven't yet been able to face within ourselves. And often, that is precisely what happens with those who feel excessively for others. They are, without knowing it, attempting to nurture in someone else a hurt they haven't confronted in their own heart. The person becomes the perpetual anchor, the ever-present counselor, the one who never fails to show up. But beneath all that giving lies a deep reservoir of weariness, because those who are constantly attuned to everyone else's needs almost always neglect their own. Excessive empathy can seem saintly, and sometimes it is, but it can also be a form of avoidance, a way to sidestep diving into one's own inner world, a way to live for others because living for oneself became too terrifying. Worse, this dynamic often creates lopsided relationships, ones where one person is constantly pouring out and the other is only receiving, where listening to another becomes a strategy to avoid hearing your own soul's whispers. And gradually, that beautiful sensitivity becomes a burden. Individuals with this trait often feel unseen when they are not in a role of service, and that is the clearest indicator that empathy, in this context, has stopped being connection and has become a defense. At its core, all this heightened perception served a vital purpose once. Someone, long ago, had to predict emotional weather to stay safe, but that is not their reality now. And perhaps the most compassionate act for them is to finally, gently turn that radar inward. Some people love with a part of their heart held in reserve. Not because they don't care, they care too much, but they hold back, they watch, they assess every signal before lowering the drawbridge. And even when they begin to trust, they always keep a secret chamber locked away, a place no one enters, a place that perpetually questions. It's as if an internal sentry constantly whispers. For someone who was fractured precisely where they needed safety most, vulnerability ceased to be simple. The memory of being left behind shouts louder than any present-day affection. Love arrives, but anxiety is its shadow. This is the third sign of those who have weathered profound hurt. A deep-seated apprehension of true intimacy. Closeness triggers ancient alarms. This isn't melodrama. It is the subconscious mind recognizing patterns that caused foundational damage. Even if the present-day person can't logically articulate why they are pulling away. I've talked about how unconscious emotional patterns can hijack our better judgment in relationships. This manifests as disproportionate reactions, jealousy that seems to come from nowhere, sudden emotional retreats. But underpinning it, there is almost always a younger self that remembers with perfect clarity how devastating it was to place trust in someone and then be abandoned. Outwardly, this individual may appear confident, even fiercely autonomous. They might say things like, "I don't need anybody," or "I prefer my own company." But inside, there is a buried longing for connection. And every time someone gets genuinely close, this longing surfaces disguised as fear, as irritability, as a need for control, or as silence. True intimacy demands showing up with your whole being, but for a person who has been deeply wounded, being fully present feels dangerously exposed. And so, love becomes a minefield to be navigated, not a sanctuary for rest. If you care for someone like this, you will need profound patience. And if you recognize yourself here, you will need immense courage, not to leap blindly, but to realize that perhaps the present moment does not have to be an automatic echo of a painful past. Not every love ends in devastation. Not every approach is a prelude to abandonment. Sometimes it is just someone choosing to stay. How many times have you been told, "You're so strong," and each time you smile, say thank you. But inside, you know that later you'll cry yourself to sleep, alone, once more. Some people became pillars of resilience because they never had any other option. When your world disintegrates prematurely, you either learn to hold the pieces together yourself, or you fall apart with it. And so, the body and mind learn to rise every single day, even when every fiber of your being wants to lie down and surrender. The fourth trait of those who have suffered intensely is this: the facade of the unbreakable person who only falls apart in absolute solitude. The exterior is composed, the voice is steady, the gaze is direct. But behind this performance is an exhaustion that is entirely invisible, because revealing weariness feels like an unacceptable failure, and showing pain isn't even on the table. I've called this persona the social mask we all use. But when the hurt is profound, that mask stops being a tool and becomes a permanent fixture. The individual becomes what the world expects them to be and forgets how to be what they truly feel. The danger is that all this apparent strength becomes a silent, isolating prison. No one offers help because everyone is convinced you have everything handled. But no human can manage everything, all the time. No one should. What looks like stability is often just containment. What looks like self-mastery is actually a terror of collapsing in front of another person. And then life becomes this exhausting act of holding everything together externally while slowly fragmenting internally. And when the breakdown finally comes, it comes in private in the shower, into a pillow, on a long, solitary drive. No one sees it. No one suspects, because the performance was so convincing. It doesn't seem possible that anything could be wrong. But it is. The weight has been too heavy for too long. Real resilience isn't about never faltering. It's about being able to say, honestly, today is a struggle, and trusting that someone will hear you without judgment, without unsolicited advice, without pressure. Just listen. Perhaps on that day, the armor can finally begin to loosen. The fifth trait is a heightened sensitivity to sensory input. Loud noises feel like an assault. Harsh lights are irritating. Crowded spaces are draining. The conscious mind tries to remain calm, but the body reacts first. The heart pounds. Breath becomes shallow. A powerful urge to escape arises for no obvious reason. This isn't being difficult. It isn't an overreaction. It's a nervous system that is being trained to exist in a state of high alert. A childhood where danger came without warning. A traumatic event that turned the ordinary world into a place of potential threat. A body that, for a long time, never learned how to truly relax. When emotional pain is deep and persistent, the body keeps the score. I've said that what we refuse to bring into our awareness will manifest in our lives as symptoms. In the case of old wounds, they return as physical sensations. The body speaks what the soul has not yet found words for. This sensitivity allows a person to perceive what others overlook, a background noise that feels aggressive, a scent others don't notice, a gaze that lingers for a moment too long and feels like condemnation. It's like living with all your senses permanently amplified, even when there is no real threat. It is utterly draining and often confusing, because people nearby don't understand why a particular environment felt uncomfortable, why a social gathering was overwhelming, why a simple conversation left someone feeling emptied. But for the person experiencing it, everything is a stimulus. Everything registers at maximum volume. This sensitivity can be a profound gift when integrated. Many people with this trait are highly intuitive, perceptive, and deeply conscious. But when it is rooted in unresolved trauma, it becomes a heavy burden. The body becomes a silent war zone, reacting to dangers the conscious mind has moved past, but the nervous system still remembers. Healing starts when we acknowledge how deeply pain impacts our physical form, when we understand that discomfort isn't a character flaw, it is a memory, and that an intense reaction to a stimulus might just be an old cry for help, finally asking to be heard. Not every discomfort is meaningless. Sometimes it is just the body saying, "This was too much for me once, and I am still trying to keep you safe." The sixth trait of those who have endured significant pain is a powerful, often obsessive need for control. And this isn't because the person is inherently domineering, rigid, or manipulative. It's because at some pivotal point, their life was engulfed by chaos. And they learned the hard lesson that if they don't manage everything, everything will fall apart. Control becomes synonymous with safety, planning every detail, anticipating every outcome, checking everything 3 times. It's not about power, it's about terror. The terror of being blindsided again. The terror of reliving an experience that was already too costly. Outwardly, it looks like efficiency, organization, and reliability. But inwardly, it is a state of perpetual tension. There is no rest, because even when all is well, the mind is still racing. What if something goes wrong? What did I forget? What if I fail? I've suggested that the conscious mind often tries to control precisely what the unconscious hasn't yet processed. And here, control functions as a barricade against life's inherent unpredictability, against the feeling of helplessness that once took root and never fully left. People trapped in this cycle struggle to unwind. They find it difficult to delegate. They resist the unexpected because to them, surprises aren't just inconveniences. They are emotional threats. They don't just disrupt plans, they shake the foundation of the self. Often, they don't even see how imprisoned they are by this mechanism. They just feel perpetually tired, always overburdened, always fixing things, even when no one asks them to. And this comes at a great cost. Relationships grow strained. Minor decisions feel monumental. The present moment is never enough because the mind is always 2 steps ahead, trying to forecast and forestall disaster. At its heart, this obsession with control is not a sign of capability. It is the mark of a spirit that once felt utterly powerless in the face of pain and is now overcompensating. But life, in its wild and mysterious flow, cannot be fully controlled. It can only be lived. And living requires a measure of trust. Not naive trust, but a small, conscious opening. The trust that perhaps, just perhaps, not every single thing needs to be managed for it to turn out okay. Healing doesn't mean abandoning all control at once. It means gradually realizing, little by little, that it is possible to exist without the constant fear that everything will collapse if you let go for a moment. But what happens when the need for control becomes so overwhelming that the only escape is to shut down completely? The 7th trait is the use of silence as a sanctuary. This isn't isolation born from arrogance or dislike of others. It is a fundamental need for space, for pause, for time to hear your own thoughts without being invaded by the demands and expectations of the outside world. Silence becomes a haven, a safe harbor, a kind of psychic cocoon where the soul attempts to reassemble itself. This can be difficult for extroverted or outwardly focused people to comprehend. Those who thrive on interaction, noise, and constant activity might find it odd when someone prefers a quiet room, a brief conversation, a less intense presence. But for those who have navigated internal hurricanes, silence is not emptiness, it is repair. I've acknowledged the profound value of retreat. I've seen withdrawal as a psychic process of dissolution and renewal. When everything feels like too much, the soul retracts, like a person protecting a wound from further contact, not from a place of coldness, but for the sake of preservation. And silence is more than just no sound. It is the absence of judgment, of demands, of performance. It is a space where nothing needs to be justified, where pain can simply be without an audience, without the pressure to get over it quickly. But over time, this silence, which began as a healing balm, can solidify into a barrier. What was once a necessary pause can become a persistent pattern. And the risk is that silence begins to equate to loneliness, and loneliness to a sense of being forgotten. That is why this trait requires gentle awareness. Not everyone who grows quiet is doing fine. Sometimes they are just too weary to keep trying to conform to a world that never stops making noise. The path is to allow that silence without self-judgment, without feeling the need to explain it, but also knowing when to cautiously open the door to allow someone else in, someone who will simply be present, who will stay. Because silence can be a home, but even a home needs a doorway. Now, have you ever noticed how the simple words, "I trust you," can feel impossibly heavy for someone who had their trust shattered? The intention gets stuck. The emotion causes the entire being to contract, not because the feeling isn't genuine, but because the potential cost feels catastrophic. The 8th trait of those who have suffered deeply is a heart that is overly fortified, barricaded, protected with every available resource. And this isn't due to spite, pride, or a lack of feeling. It's because the last time it was left unguarded, it was devastatingly wounded. The psyche learns to defend itself. It constructs invisible screening systems. It scrutinizes everything before allowing belief. It doubts before it dares to yield. It deciphers gestures, vocal inflections, even the time between text messages. Love may arrive, but it must pass through a rigorous security check before it is granted entry. And this is exhausting for the person feeling it and for the person trying to offer love, because affection never flows freely. There is always an undercurrent of tension, a silent question: can I truly rely on this? The soul lives like someone sleeping with one eye open. I've spoken of the fundamental choice between living from a place of fear and living from a place of trust. Here, fear has become the primary lens. The individual perceives everything through the memory of past injury, and even when all evidence suggests safety, an inner voice insists, stay ready, this could all change. It's as if the unconscious doesn't recognize that time has moved on. It still reacts as if the original threat were imminent, even when it isn't, even when the other person is kind, consistent, and gentle. Distrust becomes a strategy to avoid future pain, but it ultimately blocks the authentic experience of connection, because there is no profound intimacy without some element of surrender, without a degree of risk, without opening the gate and allowing someone to enter. And the greatest irony is that those who guard their hearts the most ferociously are often the ones with the deepest capacity to love and be loved. They simply don't want to endure that specific agony ever again. They are just trying to keep themselves safe. But overprotection is its own form of suffering. The key may lie in testing the waters gradually, trusting in small increments, taking one step forward and observing what happens, not throwing the doors wide open, but also not retreating entirely. Because maybe, just maybe, this time, love didn't come to wound, it came to remain. The ninth trait is a sense of justice that has been sharpened, not in a classroom, but in the furnace of personal experience, with unfairness, with betrayal, with being silenced, with the powerlessness of being profoundly hurt and having no one intervene. A spirit that has been crushed by injustice develops a keen ability to detect it from a mile away and develops a low tolerance for it. The smallest hint of disrespect triggers an ancient alarm, and even when a situation seems minor to others, the reaction can be powerful, serving as both defense and living memory. I've understood that core emotional wounds activate when a present circumstance brushes against the same injury the past inflicted. And this heightened sense of justice is one such wound. It's a characteristic of someone who bears the scar of being muted and now absolutely refuses to be quiet. Sometimes people around someone like this don't understand. They perceive it as an overreaction, as being dramatic, as impulsivity. But it isn't. It is the psyche declaring, not again, this time I will not swallow this. This ethical sensitivity often appears early. Children who witnessed wrongs and were powerless, teenagers who rebelled against nonsensical authority, adults who champion causes with the fierce intensity of someone trying to rescue their own inner child. The archetype at play here is the moral defender, the one who battles for integrity, for respect, for basic human dignity, not for an unattainable perfection. And this fight, when balanced, is a noble force. But when it is driven solely by unhealed pain, it can morph into rigidity or an inability to tolerate any perceived flaw. The challenge, then, is to hold on to that powerful sense of justice without allowing it to become a suit of armor against the entire world. To wield the sword but also to learn when to sheathe it, when to listen, when to offer grace, because those who have been wounded by unfairness know exactly how it cuts, and for that very reason they possess the rare opportunity to act differently, to be the kind of presence that protects without needing to punish, that stands for what's right without getting lost in the battle itself. Those who carry the sword of justice understand something many do not. Pain hones perception, and not just to spot wrongs, but to notice the unseen, because those who have endured profound suffering develop a kind of radar for the hidden pain in others, even when it's disguised as silence or a smile. There are glances that see through facades, not because of what is said, but because of what is silently perceived. People who know when someone is struggling, even when they claim to be fine, who intuit what hasn't been spoken, who comprehend suffering that was never shared, and who can hold a safe space without prying or demanding explanations. That is the 10th trait of those who have suffered intensely, the capacity to perceive the invisible in other human beings. It's as if sorrow fine-tuned their senses. The soul becomes more receptive, more compassionate, more open to sensing where sadness resides, even when it's expertly concealed. This isn't mystical. It's memory. The memory of having lived in that very skin, of knowing what now can only be detected in the smallest of tells. This type of perception isn't learned academically. It is earned, or more accurately, it is awakened after a great fall. Those who have wept in solitude know how to listen to quiet. Those who have felt utterly alone in a group learn to recognize when someone else is in that same desolate place. It is almost an involuntary reflex. I've suggested that as we integrate our personal pain, we become more capable of perceiving collective suffering. That is precisely what this trait embodies, a form of emotional sonar that doesn't seek recognition but activates when it's most needed. And often, this makes all the difference. This sensitivity may appear soft, but it carries a significant weight, because seeing what others miss is also a responsibility. And those who feel too deeply for others frequently neglect their own needs. They absorb, they caretake, they get deeply involved, and they can lose themselves in the process. The key is equilibrium, to see others clearly without losing sight of yourself, to be present without dissolving into the other, to feel with someone but not assume their burden as your own. This ability to perceive the invisible is a gift, but it is also a reminder. Pain, when met with conscious awareness, can transform into a tool, a healing presence, a support that doesn't intrude but upholds. And even as the world rushes on, those with this trait understand that truth lives in the subtleties, in how a person holds their body, in the space between sentences, in an "I'm okay" that doesn't quite ring true, and only someone who has known real anguish can truly decipher what that means. But seeing others with such clarity comes with a price. While you are busy reading the eyes, the gestures, the tones of voice of everyone around you, a quiet voice inside might whisper, "But what if you, yourself, are just too much?" A problem? Have you ever found yourself apologizing for something minor, or for simply existing in a space? Have you ever felt that by merely being present with your needs and your history, you were inherently an inconvenience? The 11th trait of those who have endured significant pain is this: a profound, often silent fear of being a burden to others. It's a quiet but persistent feeling, a kind of unspoken shame for existing as a human being, with needs, with hurts, with desires. Those who carry this fear almost never voice it aloud, but it reveals itself in every attempt to make themselves smaller, in every "I'm fine" offered to prevent causing worry. In every time they swallow their tears so no one will think they are fragile or difficult. This pattern usually begins in childhood. When a person's emotional pain was dismissed, minimized, or treated as an annoyance, children who were told stop crying, don't be dramatic, or who were simply ignored, grow into adults who believe that having feelings is a liability and that they themselves are an imposition. The adult that emerges is often exceptionally kind, helpful, and responsible, but lives in constant apprehension of being too much. They feel guilty for requesting assistance. They feel ashamed for occupying space, especially during moments of vulnerability. They live as if they must constantly compensate for the simple fact that they take up room in the world. I've described this as an unconscious guilt, something born from a foundational wound so deep that the ego structures itself around it. In this case, the wound says, you are only valuable if you are not a problem. The person learns to over-explain, to minimize their own suffering, to downplay every need. Sometimes, even receiving love feels uncomfortable, as if they are taking a spot that rightfully belongs to someone more deserving. But living this way is like walking on eggshells in your own life. It is existing as if you need permission to simply be. The truth is, no one should feel ashamed for having needs. Needing is part of the human condition. Feeling weary is human. And being vulnerable is, too. Recognizing this fear is already a part of the healing journey, because when you begin to understand that taking up space is not a transgression, but a birthright, something fundamental shifts, the weight lightens, the spirit stands a little taller, and life ceases to be a perpetual effort to avoid being a nuisance. You don't have to earn your place in relationships. You don't have to justify your existence so relentlessly. Your presence here is already enough. And even amidst all this fear of being a burden, your soul still finds solace in the small, often overlooked details of life. In the warmth of a morning beverage held between your hands. In a simple, genuine good morning from a stranger. Because those who have lost a great deal learn to cherish the smallest of gifts. And it is often in these moments that healing truly begins to take root. A warm cup in your hands, the way the late afternoon sun paints the wall, something that simple. A "did you get home safe?" text message. The sound of rainfall while the rest of the world is in a hurry. The 12th trait of those who have suffered intensely is this profound ability to find deep appreciation in life's simple pleasures. This isn't about romanticizing suffering. It's about what remains after the storm has passed. When you navigate periods where everything seems to be collapsing, when chaos was the norm, the simple, stable things acquire a new, profound significance. The small no longer feels insignificant. It becomes an anchor, a signal of peace, a testament to presence. Those who have been broken apart and put themselves back together learn to spot beauty where others might just walk on by. The soul cultivates a quiet, persistent gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for the calm that can follow it, for the unexpected kindness, for the stability that once felt utterly out of reach. I've spoken of the archetype of the sage, the one who, after confronting their own darkness, returns to the world with a renewed, more profound way of seeing, more grounded, more attentive, more truly present. That is what occurs here. The person doesn't require grand gestures to feel alive, and when they do feel joy or peace, they feel it completely. This depth of feeling shows up in the mundane. It's the person who smiles genuinely at a sunset, who says a heartfelt thank you for a meal prepared with care, who is moved to tears by a piece of music because it touched a place they didn't know was still tender. And sometimes This is mistaken for naivete or fragility, but it is the absolute opposite. It is depth. It is emotional intelligence. It is having survived the whirlwind and still choosing to hold on to softness. The capacity to appreciate the little things is a hallmark of someone who understands what it means to have nothing, and who now sees the immense value in what they have before it's gone. It is a more engaged presence, a silence that knows how to truly listen, a gaze that offers thanks even before anything is requested. And the 13th trait of those who have endured profound pain is this: a deep, non-negotiable need to find purpose on the other side of that pain. Mere survival is not sufficient. The soul craves to understand the why. It seeks to transform suffering into direction, to make meaning out of what once felt like pure devastation. It is very common that after passing through a deeply difficult experience, a person begins a quest for something larger than themselves, a reason to continue, a way to ensure that the struggle was not entirely in vain. And that reason is rarely loud or flashy, but it is deeply, personally true. It might be offering support to another person traveling a similar path. It might be creating something beautiful, art, a garden, a community. It might be teaching, healing, or simply showing up for someone in the way no one ever showed up for them. But there must be a why. Pain demands to become a pathway. I viewed this as the dawn of true self-actualization. When an individual ceases to be a captive of their own history and begins the work of turning it into wisdom, into mission, into a gift for others, this trait reveals itself in how the person begins to move through the world less concerned with external validation, more connected to an internal truth. They know life is fleeting and that being here carries a cost, so they are determined to make their time matter. They instill meaning even into experiences that were once unbearable. And no, this doesn't mean the pain has vanished. It is still there, has a memory, has a scar, but it no longer holds the reins. Now, it serves as a guide. It indicates the way. Those who feel this begin to look back and recognize that even when they were shattered, they kept moving. That even when wounded, they still found the capacity to care. That even without a clear map, they are learning to alchemize suffering into presence and presence into purpose. And this isn't about becoming a perfect example or appearing invincible. It is about gradually, step by step, no longer just enduring, but beginning to live with clear intention. This need for purpose is not an escape from reality. It is growth. It is the birth of something new within the human spirit. Something that declares, I went through that, but that is not the sum total of who I am. And from that place, life truly begins to blossom in an entirely new way. You are not defined by your pain, but you also don't have to pretend it doesn't exist. There is a unique, hard-won strength in the manner of your survival. A kind of raw, unpolished wisdom forged in the quiet corners of your being, without an audience, without applause. Every single sign we've explored is a reflection of that, of what you had to do to remain standing, of how you discovered a way to keep going even on the days when every part of you wanted to give up. Some of these traits became necessary armor, others became inner guides. Some turned into heavy weights, others into unexpected strengths. But all of them, without a single exception, originated as an attempt to protect something precious and vital within you. I've said that a tree that grows tall enough to touch the sky must send roots deep enough to reach into the dark earth. And that is the essence of your journey. Everything you have grown into is intimately connected to what you have withstood. You are not flawed for carrying these marks. You are a survivor. And surviving, after all you have navigated, is a form of strength that the world seldom recognizes, but that is real and potent and worthy of honor. This is not about claiming that everything is now perfectly healed. It's not the promise that life will magically become effortless from this point forward, but perhaps for the very first time, you can look upon those parts of yourself that you've learned to criticize with a little more gentleness, understanding that they, too, were trying to protect you. You don't have to hide any part of your story anymore or remain perpetually on guard. The pain that shaped you does not have to lead the way anymore. It can now walk beside you as a quiet witness. As you continue forward with greater awareness, with more freedom, and with the deep knowing that what once felt like a weakness was in fact a brilliant strategy to ensure you did not give up, remember this: you kept going. And that alone speaks volumes about the strength of your spirit. If anything we've shared today resonated with you, if you saw your own reflection in any of these signs, or thought of someone you love who bears these marks, let this understanding gently light your path forward. We will continue to explore these profound landscapes of the human psyche, of hurt and healing, always with respect, with simplicity, and with a commitment to truth. And if you have stayed with this knowledge until the very end, hold on to this simple but powerful thought: my pain has also been my teacher. Carry this awareness with you, and perhaps someone else will sense your understanding and feel, even for a moment, a little less alone in their own journey. Go gently and tend to your own soul with care. You have absolutely earned that right. And if this resonated with you, please do like this video. It truly helps the channel Wake and Win reach others who might need to hear this message. Thank you for watching.